this, let me provide a little bit of context. The Storm Lake undergraduate program is very positive, strong, attracts students. I would suggest to you that we compete with respect to the Storm Lake program on execution. What we do it better than our competitors, and that's why we're successful. But at the core of it, it's not terribly different from what's going on other campuses with whom we compete. It's not to say that's bad. You'll remember that early on, we talked about some of the strategy literature that noted that lots of organizations do very well, even though they're not different from the competition. They're just better. It seems to me, from what I've read and thinking about it, we have a strategic choice to make with respect to the Storm Lake program. Do we want to continue to compete on execution, or do we also want to try to differentiate it somehow? The interim term might provide an interesting vehicle to test out some options. You don't have to reorient the whole university all at once. So pilot programs in the interim might make some sense. Centers, everybody talked about this. Good news and bad news. Good news is, and I found this affirming, lots of people talked about the importance of the centers in the life of the university. But we were chided for underinvesting in the centers across the board. Staffing, technology, faculty development, library resources, right down the line. And it runs throughout the center reports and lots of reports from the main campus as well. Enrollment. We do not have a consensus on this campus for how large this university ought to be. If you read the reports, what you'll see is that there's a substantial number of people who want us to grow, and there are a substantial number of people who are scared to death that we're going to grow. And it cuts across the board. Students, faculty, staff, adjunct faculty, alumni board, across the board. We don't have a consensus. Seems to me we need to have a more structured dialogue about how big we really want to be. Lots of people talked about new markets, primarily because of the challenging demographics within the state of Iowa. Conversation about diversifying the student body, and concern about reliance on tuition discounting. It has served us well. It has served our students well, it has served the university well, but it is a high-stakes game. We are playing it very well, but there's concern, and there should be, about continued reliance on it. And then finally, retention. Noting that freshman to sophomore retention is the worst it's been in 7 years. And the observation that we don't have a focused retention program, and we don't have anybody whose primary responsibility it is to oversee such a program. New markets I've already mentioned, but I might say beyond enrollment at Storm Lake, talking about new opportunities in the international arena was something else that people mentioned. Facilities, good news and not so good news. The forum, the suites, the library, fantastic facilities. Lots of people would give their eye teeth to have facilities like that. And yet we have pockets of inadequacy. We know that. Edson, Science Building, Smith, Field House, lack of air conditioning in White. There were other things mentioned as well. Now, all of you know, and as Jim has noted correctly before, you can't do everything overnight. But what happens is that as nice new facilities are built and you have rising expectations, when another one's inadequate, it looks all the worse. Fiscal affairs. Everybody talked about our financial strength and what a positive thing it is. And everybody noted that because we have capital needs for buildings and other things, concern about tuition discounting, $6.5 to $7 million a year right out of our budget for institutional financial aid, and programmatic initiatives that we want to have. Fundraising was at the top of nearly everybody's list. So Jim, you got your wish. Jim wanted to put all 5 dots beside fundraising when we did the SWOT. So everybody did this for you. Everybody talked about fundraising. And noted the opportunities presented by the intergenerational transfer of wealth. $8 trillion is going to change hands in America between the generations in the next 6 years. Talking about the importance of stimulating the alumni participation rate to make us more attractive to foundations and other funding entities, and also noted concern about competition. The competition in the world of philanthropy has never been keener, and it's becoming more intense all the time. Board development, and guess who talked about this the most? The trustees themselves. About attracting a cadre of new trustees, additional trustees, who have the financial resources and the talent to take us to the next level and the willingness to share both with us. And I saved the dots on that one. They all put dots beside that. Community relations noted the importance of that, and that probably needs some work, that our town and gown relationship could be better than it is. And religious life and church affiliations. Now, church relations. Some people didn't talk about this at all, and other groups talked about it a lot. That's not surprising. The people who talked about it suggest that we need to augment our religious life program. And a lesser number, fewer people, but still a substantial number of people talked about our relationship with the church, that we ought to try to strengthen it and build some bridges to the church. Now, step back. I looked at all that and more, which is not here, and then wrote it up, shared it with the cabinet. I also shared it with the facilitators and the recorders on Tuesday. So they have seen what you're going to see now. The reason I did that is because several of you made comments that although you appreciated the importance of having groups that were segmented by faculty, staff, and students, there needed to be an opportunity for people from across the university to come together and look at the draft. And so we thought it would be a nice idea to have the facilitators and the recorders to do that. So they've seen this on Tuesday and had the opportunity to comment on it. Here are the strategies that we suggest. And I should say, this is your work. There shouldn't really be any surprises here. Student-centeredness and organizational climate. All programs must reflect student-centeredness as their core value and must be regularly assessed for quality and effectiveness. What does student-centeredness mean? For me, it means that for every decision that we make, for every action that we take, the first question we should ask ourselves is, what's the effect on students? We're going to ask that every time. That's why we're here. Without the students, we would not be here. And then assessment, not just for the accreditation people, but because it's good management to constantly assess how you're doing, see if you're achieving your mission. Second, improved communication in all sectors of the university will be a priority as we seek to foster a culture of ubiquitous innovation. This one right here, if I were going to pick one out, these two are primary, this one would have to be right near the top of the list. If we don't fix this, we're not going to do any of the rest of this strategy. This is a big problem on our campus. Now, I'm going to lead the way. I'm going to try to model behavior on this. I've been doing some of that already, and I've received some nice messages from some of you, and I appreciate that. But we're also going to have to model it for each other. I'll do my part, but we have to learn to communicate better than we're doing now. Strategy number 3 under student-centeredness and organizational climate. An enhanced sense of community between the 5 schools is vital if we are to achieve our strategic intent. There are barriers between the schools that prevent us from talking to one another, faculty and students. We have to work to reduce those barriers. Some of it's resource allocation. There's no doubt about that. And Dean Lampe and I are taking a very close look at that. I think it would be the height of folly for us to say that our objective is that everybody gets the same amount of money. That would be sort of idiotic. But there are some resource allocation questions there. We're taking a look at those. We have to build community between the schools. Investing in people. We have got to implement a comprehensive and effective human resources effort that provides high-quality staff and faculty development opportunities. I heard you loud and clear on this one. Our reward system must consistently encourage those whose performance demonstrably advances our strategy, and regular career counseling is essential to this. I sat in on a SWAT where one of the participants said, I have yet to have a conversation with my supervisor about how I'm doing. We don't talk about that. The only time I ever hear about that is at the end of the year when I get my new paycheck and see what my raise is. That is totally unacceptable. Totally. People are our most important resource, and that is just poor. Just poor that is happening. We got to fix it. Investing in people, point number 3. Maintain faculty and staffing levels that reflect a balance of quality service to students with financial stewardship. You've built in the last several years residence halls, new parking lots, put a new roof on buildings, all kinds of capital improvements, renovation to SWOPE that's still ongoing without any debt. There are colleges and universities across this country that would die to be able to do that. And we have to continue to maintain that kind of financial flexibility, but also make sure that we serve our students well and that we are providing a quality work-life environment for our employees, faculty, and staff. Academic program. A rigorous personalized educational experience through superlative and innovative teaching and advising. Second, effectively blend our most popular majors, the pre-professional programs, with our foundation in the liberal arts. And we ought to be sure that when a student graduates from here that he or she can read well, write well, solve problems, work with others, all those attributes I talked about. If they can do that, they will do well in this life. The statistics are that most of them will be fired at least once. They'll probably change careers 8 times, and they're going to work in jobs that don't exist today. Content is important, but as Carl Sagan himself said, it's important that they be able to learn for a lifetime, and the liberal arts disciplines are well suited to do that. Interdisciplinary programs, including internships, need to be an emphasis. As I said earlier, students are going to graduate into a world where they're going to confront problems that cut across lots of different subject areas. To the extent that we can begin to facilitate the development of being able to deal with lots of different subjects at the same time, we serve our students well and we serve the world well. Integrate knowledge with practice by serving the region and by working on some of the critical problems that our society faces. More about this in due course. Offerings will feature an international emphasis across the board, and so students graduate ready to be citizens of the world. There are lots of different ways where that can happen, and we do a lot of good work in this area already. You don't have to go to a foreign country to be exposed to the global economy. That can happen in a classroom in Storm Lake. But you can travel overseas. You can go for an internship. We can bring students from foreign countries to our campus and broaden the exposure for our students, most of whom are Iowans. There are all kinds of opportunities to do that. We need to continue what we're doing and strengthen it. We must develop for consideration, and I underscore consideration, Delivery system options that would differentiate the core of the Storm Lake program. Please don't go out of here and say that the President said, we are going to reorient the whole university and do a different delivery system. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is we ought to begin to take a look at some alternatives. Then see if they seem to make sense for us. If they do, one way to try them out is in the interim term. And that would do something else for us. It would reinvigorate the interim experience here in Storm Lake, and that is in real need of work, as you have noted and as we have discussed before. We must celebrate the centers as part of our mission and strengthen the linkages between them and the main campus in Storm Lake. Investing in the centers to maintain our reputation for quality is essential, and we've got to continue to update our delivery system to take advantage of technological and other innovations. Digression for a moment. I have been to 4 centers, and I will tell you that the world is working alive with people who would love to have the position that we have. They are all over these community college presidents asking for permission to come in and offer courses, which would not be a good thing for us at all. And there's a lot going on out there in the way of delivery. Accelerated programs, distance learning, other innovations. We've got to keep ourselves current if we're going to maintain our competitive advantage. We must, with respect to the co-curricular program, develop a student development program that is firmly grounded in the literature and it mirrors and supports the academic program's objectives. Technology. Students have to be proficient with current technology when they hit the marketplace. We must take advantage of developing technologies to transform our classrooms into 21st century venues of scholastic dialogue. And we must also provide our faculty and staff with the technology that makes their work enjoyable, less frustrating, user-friendly, and productive. And good news in this regard. 2 days ago, I signed off on lots of people getting new computers. Santa Claus is coming early. Just watch your mail. We're not doing it all at once, but we're doing a big piece of it. Enrollment. We've got to clearly articulate a goal for size of the Storm Lake program that doesn't compromise our niche of being a highly personalized educational provider. We've got to maintain our base in Iowa, but we've got to penetrate new markets in the United States and overseas. More on enrollment. We've got to maximize the chance for student persistence through a focused student retention agenda. And in my judgment, we need to have somebody whose primary responsibility it is to oversee that effort. We need to diversify the student body to include more persons from ethnic minorities in the United States and from foreign countries. Candidly, if we're going to do that, and as the events of this fall show, our campus is going to need to be more welcoming to people from different cultures. New ventures, new programs for undergraduate students in Storm Lake, new graduate programs, partnerships overseas, possibly on the ground in foreign countries, as we seek to serve a new group of students. Here are some proposed criteria by which we will decide if we're going to start these programs. 1, are they consistent with our strategic intent? More about strategic intent in a few minutes. 2, are we sure we can deliver a high-quality program? And 3, is the program going to be economically self-sustaining within a reasonable period of time? We do not have unlimited resources. We cannot do everything. And so we need to make sure that it can sustain itself within a reasonable period of time. Facilities. Modernize the rest of the campus with the following buildings being given a priority. Do they have physical characteristics that substantially impinge on the activities being delivered in those buildings? And I would suggest to you those are the ones that ought to be done first. It is absolutely essential. We've got to have a long-term land use plan. We're landlocked and we only have about 60 acres, so that will be important to us. Equipment, facilities and equipment here. Equipment, apart from our buildings, the academic programs, equipment must be regularly updated. Lots of you have shared with me. I know, for example, in the phys ed and exercise science area, in the science programs, in other places too, we've got some equipment that's out of date. It's impinging on being able to offer the students a good experience. It also candidly hurts our marketability. Fiscal affairs. Manage our resources prudently and continue to pursue an aggressive investment policy. 90% of our endowment is in equities, most of it's offshore. Very aggressive. 2 years ago, we took a $7 million hit in the endowment, but we just got written up in the Chronicle of Higher Ed because we've been so successful in managing our investments. And I think an aggressive policy is important because if the endowment's going to make a difference, it has to be big. We've got to raise the capital necessary to modernize the rest of the physical plant, reduce our dependence on discounting, e.g., raise money for endowed scholarships has to be a major priority, and to be able to offer distinctive academic and co-curricular programs. Planned giving and increasing the percentage of the alumni who give to the university will be important. And we have got to diversify our major donor base. We don't need to be in a position where we can say that only 2 donors have ever given the university as much as $1 million. God knows I'm glad we have them, but we need to have more $1 million donors than 2. Board development. Recruit additional trustees who possess the resources and talents to take us to the next level. And again, the trustees themselves put all the dots beside this one. I now know why Don Lamberti has 950 stores. He is the new chairman of the nominating committee. He calls me once a week to find out what we are doing about recruiting new trustees. I'll tell you, having a volunteer like him is wonderful, but he gets it done yesterday. We're going to add 6, try to add 6 by next May, and we are scheduled to go see 2 and have our sights on a 3rd. Religious life and church relationship. We ought to increase the opportunities for spiritual reflection, underscoring opportunity. Just a couple of moments on that. You all know my wife is a minister, and I've told you that my religious faith is important to me. That's a personal decision for us. We have people on our campus who espouse no religious faith and have no interest in espousing religious faith. That's fine. With respect to those who do, we have lots of different backgrounds. We have mainline Protestants, but there we have more Lutherans on our campus than Presbyterians. The largest population is Roman Catholic. We have students from the Far East who are Muslim and who are Buddhist. We have lots of different traditions on our campus. We ought to affirm those traditions. We ought to offer more opportunities, but not get up in anybody's face about it. We have an ecumenical community, and our religious life program ought to reflect that. And we ought to strengthen our relationship with the Presbyterian Church. Now, it's true that the corporate contribution from the church is going down. We're no different from any other institution in that regard. That's one way to look at our relationship with the church, but I think that's pretty narrow. 2/3 of our donor base is Presbyterian. And we still have a lot of Presbyterian students. And especially based on the conversation I had at lunch today, if we strengthen our program and build some bridges to the church, I think there's some people out there who want to help us find some donors and find some students. I'm not saying there's going to be any huge bonanza, and that ought not to be the primary reason we do this, but there's room for improvement here. We can help the university by doing that. Summary. This is ambitious, no doubt about it. Some of it we need to finish in 6 months, and some of it may take 10 or 15 years. But it's attainable. We can do it. Now, as I looked at all this, and I said, is there something here more than the sum of the parts? Is there a theme that runs through this, an overarching theme? I sat and thought about that for a while. About a year ago, I read a piece by Ernest Boyer in the Chronicle of Higher Education talking about the New American College. I don't know how many of you read that piece, but I found it intriguing. It was well before I was even in the process here. And as I read your reports and put this strategy together to propose, actually, you've written it more than I have. I said, we've learned some things about ourselves, and they remind me a little bit of something I read. So I went back and reread the materials about the New American College, and there's been more written about it since then. I mentioned Ernest Boyer. Ernest Boyer, for those of you who don't know, is the president of the Carnegie Endowment for Excellence or Innovation in Teaching. Most people, I think, would concede that he is the world's foremost authority on higher education. When he speaks, everybody listens. I also read some work by Jerry Barabet and Frank Wong, so you'll see some of those ideas reflected in here. I think you'll be interested in what you see. First, before we do that, we need to talk very briefly about a typology for Americans, higher education's four-year institutions. There are lots of different typologies, but for our purposes, let me offer this one. Three distinct types of institutions: the large research university, the traditional liberal arts college, and then the New American College. First, the large research university. Lots of you know this, but for some who don't, bear with me for a moment. What characterizes that? Scholarship through the discovery of knowledge. Faculty are rewarded almost exclusively, not based on teaching, but on the quality and number of publications they generate. Characterized by large classes, particularly in the freshman and sophomore year. Moving increasingly into the extension campus environment in our state. Competition for us. Examples: the University of Iowa and Iowa State. Next, the traditional liberal arts college. Smaller, much smaller than the large research university. More traditional students, almost exclusively residential in nature. Niche, programs other than the pre-professional ones. The humanities, social sciences. Examples: in our region, Grinnell and Cornell. The New American College. Remember the strategies that you wrote. You really wrote them as we go through this. First, a bit of history. Higher education has had a tradition since the beginning of our republic for being involved in working on important societal problems. You go back to the founding of our country, and that's true. I spoke earlier about the intrinsic value of education. Education has extrinsic value as well. All of us who are fortunate enough to have an education, we possess talents and attributes that enable us to offer important contributions to the world. And with that privilege of having a higher education comes an obligation, it seems to me. We need to work to improve the human condition. And the human condition never needed us more than it does today. Never needed us more. I'm going to read these slowly because the type's kind of small. Let's talk about children first. In many places in this country and in this state, children are born into homes where dad may have bolted and he doesn't pay his child support. A lot of them born into poverty. There's sexual abuse in the home. There's drug abuse in the home. The children are battered. Is it any surprise that when they reach kindergarten, they're not ready to learn? They don't have all the hidden curriculum and the advantages that we've had. Crime skyrocketing. And who increasingly are the offenders? High school students, junior high, middle school. Economic dislocation. Right in the middle of the Reagan Revolution, the Fortune 500 was laying off 100,000 people a year. and that still continues. Lots of people losing their jobs. An aging population, and those of us who are baby boomers are wondering, when we reach retirement age, is Social Security going to be there for us? How do fewer younger people support more seniors? The balance between environmental issues and the creation of jobs. Technology, a very positive thing, but it's changing our lives at breakneck speed, and that causes tension. In Iowa, the demise of the family farm. Lots of people trying to figure out what they're going to do with their lives now that their plan of action has been shattered. And then diversity, right here in Storm Lake. Senator Freeman told me yesterday, I believe this is what she said. I still have to kind of wince when I hear it because it's a startling statistic. 25% of the children in the Storm Lake School District do not speak fluent English. We have an increasingly diverse population here, and that is a good thing. I grew up in the South, as you know, and I went through school integration in the 1960s, and I lived in an environment that was multicultural, and I sure am glad I did because I think it's helped me so much. I think Susan would say the same thing. It broadens us. It's a good thing. But let's be honest about it. It also produces tension because it's change. The lieutenant governor was here within the last couple of weeks and praised local leaders for our programs dealing with diversity, and I would join her in that. But we aren't finished. We have just gotten started. Boyer and others who look at all this say, what we need if higher education is going to respond to these problems is a redefinition of scholarship in this country, where we celebrate not only the discovery of knowledge as scholarship, but also integrating theory with action to work in the world, of communicating knowledge, and perhaps most important, applying knowledge through professional service, that these three are legitimate areas of scholarship, just like the first. The first is important, terribly important, so are these. It's a redefinition of scholarship. And that is the heart of the new American college model, is this redefinition of scholarship. What are the features of the new American college? Here's the laundry list, and it's still being developed. First, that faculty and students work together on societal problems out in the field, internships, other kinds of opportunities. Interdisciplinary programs, terribly important. Why? If the child is not ready to learn when he or she gets to first grade, some of it is economic, some of it has to do with crime, some of it has to do with drugs and lack of nutrition and all those other maladies that worry us so much, and that cuts across lots of different subject areas. So interdisciplinary programs are important. A celebration of pre-professional education as legitimate scholarly activity. Why? Because it's so oriented towards working in the world. Working at the intersection of the liberal arts and the pre-professional programs. Melding them together. It builds community, which is a nice byproduct, particularly when you think about our campus right now. But melding those together to enable students to learn further and to have the broad perspective that they need to be of service to society. Other features. Service to the surrounding areas, non-traditional students through branch campuses. Does this start to remind you of something that you wrote? Graduate programs, particularly in the professional area. Boyer and others say the new American college is an idea whose time has come. Why? Because society needs us so much right now. but it has practical benefits as well. Remember when we talked about the erosion of support for higher education, fundraising? Why? Because the American people are increasingly concerned about some of the problems that we've been talking about today. And they perceive, rightly or wrongly, that we aren't front and center working on those problems. Now, we should not adopt a strategy for our university, for the academic program in particular, just because it's going to raise money. That would be the height of folly. This happens to be something that plays to our strengths, but it also has a practical benefit. We'll be able to raise money for it, and it will attract students. It bears a striking resemblance to the strategy that we have crafted. And here's the list. Celebration of pre-professional education. The scholarship of integrating action and service. The intersection of the liberal arts and the pre-professional programs. Interdisciplinary programs. Servicing non-traditional students. Building community on campus that fosters interdisciplinary synergy. I would suggest to you that we really did not need Ernest Boyer and these other folks to help us figure this out. They are writing about the kinds of things that you have said are important. Now, are we there yet? No. We've got pockets where we need to improve, certainly. We don't have all the pieces of this. We could wait for this to be refined. This is very new. Boyer first wrote about this about a year ago. There's a group called the Wingspread Group, college presidents and other scholars who gather now on an annual basis to talk about this phenomenon. And this is going to be refined and developed over time, and we could wait for all that to happen. We could wait for it to be perfected. That does not sound to me like the university that was the first to put computers on faculty members' desks, has the largest cash purse, so we think, or perhaps the largest, for excellence in teaching in America. All the things that have made this university great. And the thing that drew me is that you all like to push the envelope, and so do I. And so I think for us to sit back and wait for this to be perfected would be antithetical to the history of this university. We have a tradition of being a leader. We need, in thinking about this, to proclaim our strategic intent. And I will deal with that. What is it? Strategic intent. Being a leader requires bold, unbridled ambition to be the best. It is a relentless, obsessive drive to perform at levels unmatched by anyone. And I should give credit to Hamill and Prahalad for talking about this concept in a seminal work in the Harvard Business Review. The obsession to be the best is the nature of strategic intent. You only have to look to NASA, Canon copiers, and Habitat to see the truth of that statement. When Jack Kennedy said we're going to land a person on the moon and return them before the decade is out, when Canon copiers said in 1970 we're going to beat Xerox, which looked preposterous to some at the time, and when Millard Fuller, who founded Habitat for Humanity, said our goal is to eradicate poverty housing, that looked pretty aggressive to lots of people. And yet we know that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon in 1969, and we know that Canon copiers by 1985 was selling as many copiers as Xerox, and we know that Habitat for Humanity is now a thriving housing ministry with about 200 affiliates across the United States and overseas, building poverty housing with unskilled volunteers, donated labor, one skilled person, a four-person on the project at any given time. That's all they do, building houses to beat the band for the working poor. Why is it important because it articulates a goal worthy of our commitment to be the best, to be better than everybody else. It elevates strategy to vision. And Henry Mintzberg, remember him? We talked about him at the beginning of the semester. He said the best strategies are visions. It does not replace strategy. All it offers is a way to organize it. The 10 or 15 things that we have listed up here, there's something running through that that's greater than the sum of the parts. And it offers a way to organize that theme, boil it down in a way that makes sense for people. It doesn't replace it. What do I suggest to you our strategic intent ought to be? It ought to be the nation's leading new American college. That's ambitious. It certainly is. It's also attainable. We can do this. Why? First, it plays to our strengths. We've got some work to do, I think particularly in the area of community, so we can have innovative interdisciplinary programs, and in service, out there working in the world. But all that other laundry list of characteristics that we saw, we embody those. 10 years ago, I guess, my predecessor, in the aftermath of an $18 million gift, suggested that this institution was going to become the next Harvard. And I don't want to be critical of that. I've never gotten an $18 million gift. I'd love to get another one. That'd be great. I'd like to get a $10 million gift. $5 million would be nice. Wouldn't it, Jim? In the euphoria after that, there was reason to believe that maybe becoming the next Harvard was an appropriate course of action. But you know, and I don't mean to be critical, being the next Harvard doesn't play to our strengths. That's not what we do. What we do very well are a lot of the characteristics that you wrote about and that Boyer and the others simply hung a name on. You figured it out. That's what we do well. Second thing is that if I think about where's the excitement in education today, I think it's on the cutting edge, and in particular being responsive to the needs of the world. We just happen to be fortunate enough that our strengths play to that model. I'm not talking about us being the next Harvard of the Midwest. I don't think we ought to try to do that. There already is a Harvard and a Yale and a Princeton. I don't think we ought to try to be the next, even the University of North Carolina. There's already one of those too. This is a lot more exciting, I think, than trying to be the next Harvard, because I think this is where we're going to have the convergence between the world needs and what we do well. It's bold, but it's absolutely attainable. It plays to our strengths and it meets society's needs. I ask you to begin a quest with me, and it is to become the best in the country at being the new American college. And we'll figure part of it out as we go. It's still being defined. We'll help define it and refine it. And we'll be the standard by which others will judge what is a great new American college. It's an ambitious agenda. We can do it. Thank you for being here. I'd be glad to entertain questions, but probably the best thing for us to do is, if you want to chat some now, why don't you come up on the stage? I have a brief interview I have to do with the TAC, but I'll be not with the reporter very long, and I'd be glad to chat now. But more important, take the handout, read it. This is a big commitment, and we ought to be sober in pondering it. We should take some time to reflect on it. And I'll be around to have conversation. If you want to come see me in the office before that to talk some more, I'll be glad to do that. If you want to fuss with me, I'll be glad to have you fuss with me too. Have a good afternoon, and we will talk about this some more.